So I just rewatched The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in theaters, just like a lot of Spider-Man fans did recently due to Sony re-releasing all the Spider-Man films into theaters, and I just realized it has been 10 years since this movie was first released. Like, wow. I can't believe it's been that long since The Amazing Spider-Man 2 first came out. I was in freaking elementary school when I first watched this movie in theaters. Like, I could barely write a paragraph, but now I'm in college, and I have to do a lot more than write paragraphs, unfortunately. But yeah, 10 years since the cinematic experience, let's call it that, experience first released, and how has it held up 10 years later? Well, back in 2014, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was really not received well at all. I remember at the time, fans and critics really disliked this movie. Like, you got the bunch of fans that were Raimi fanboys, and they really wanted more Raimi Spider-Man, and they didn't like this realistic, darker take on the character. So they were like anti-Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. There were also fans who felt like this movie was just a mess due to it feeling like it was just a setup movie and too many things were going on, and the final result was it was a bad superhero movie. And then there was the critics that trashed the movie as well. Then the cherry on top for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was it was a disappointment for Sony at the box office, which made Sony panic and made them want to bring Spider-Man over to the MCU with a complete reboot 2 years after their last movie, which is just kind of crazy. I think that's like a world record for the quickest amount of time a movie franchise rebooted. In 2014, this film was an epic failure any way you look at it, and it was crowned the worst Spider-Man movie of all time by many fans. Now, 10 years later, how has this film aged? From what I could see, this film aged quite well, and there's a bit more love for this movie now compared to back then, but I would say what was mainly changed for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the duology of movies as a whole is how many view Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. After Spider-Man No Way Home, Andrew Garfield gained a ton of support for his Spider-Man to the point where fans really want to see an Amazing Spider-Man 3, which I totally support getting an Amazing Spider-Man 3. Like, I want to see a vengeful Peter who stopped pulling his punches. Some fan even crowned Garfield as being the best Spider-Man of all time, and due to all that, people look back at The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in a much better light now. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 also got more love because of some fans disliking the MCU Spider-Man so much to the point where they now tolerate The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they go back rewatching it thinking it wasn't as bad as they once thought. With that all being said, I gotta say my thoughts on The Amazing Spider-Man 2 have been the same since I first watched it 10 years ago. And my take on this movie is it's just okay. It's definitely way too overhated, and I don't think it's the worst Spider-Man movie at all. I like this movie more than Spider-Man 3 and Far From Home for sure. The positives are so extremely high, but the negatives are so extremely low. Starting off with the positives, you have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. I always really liked Andrew Spider-Man, and I wasn't one of those fans that just started to really like his take on the character recently. Like, did people 10 years ago watch his scenes where he has a ton of emotion in the Amazing Spider-Man movies? Like, Andrew is such an incredible actor, and he brings so much depth to the role. Also, I love how Spider-Man acts when he is in the suit, performance-wise, and the way he is written, when only in the suit, because I have a different opinion on this Peter Parker. I remember this one scene in Amazing Spider-Man 2 where Spider-Man sticks up for this kid that's being bullied, and he walks him home from school, and then at the end of the movie he has a really nice moment with the same kid, and it's like a really full circle moment, and it's so Spider-Man. This is how Spider-Man should be, and it feels so much like Spider-Man from the comics, and I love it. Scenes like that is just why I love Spider-Man so much in all media, when it's actually like that, because there's times when Spider-Man doesn't actually feel like Spider-Man. And no, I'm not talking about the movies, I'm talking about other sources of media. The only critique I have with Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man is that he sometimes lets a lot of damage happen around him so he could just make a joke, and this really happens in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, especially in that opening scene where he's just letting a bunch of cards get damaged and people die, and it's kind of a weird pattern in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 where it's like he has to make a joke and let damage happen around him. Like, bullets are flying in the air and Spider-Man's just making jokes and not trying to like deal with the situation. I felt like I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to make Spider-Man feel more like Spider-Man from the comics, but that's just not how you implement the jokes. He saves people first and does the jokes second. When bullets are flying in the air, he's not going to start making jokes. He's going to try to make sure people are safe before he starts making the jokes. And usually he makes the jokes when he's like talking with the villain, not as like, well, yeah, if it's like in the middle of a fight, then yeah, he would talk with them. But if there's like people around and like cars that need to be saved, he won't just let them get crushed and explode and all that other stuff. Not only does it feel out of character from the Spider-Man we know from the comics, but it also feels out of character for the Spider-Man that we got in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. Yes, he made jokes, but it was at appropriate times, and that Spider-Man was much more serious than this Spider-Man, which I was okay with the take on the first Amazing Spider-Man. They did not need to do such an extreme course correction on the character. Now, with his take on Peter Parker, I do gotta say, I like how they really showed the science side of Andrew Spider-Man, but I do wish they would cut out the skateboard and the cool guy attitude that he has. I like my Peter Parkers to be much more shy and awkward, but the heart of Peter Parker is still there within the performance and the way he's written, like the way he cares about his friends, the way he has so much going on in his life, and there's just so much trauma within the character. At its core, Andrew Garfield still feels like the Peter Parker we all know and love. And continue talking about Peter, we also have his relationship with Gwen, which was done really well for the most part. I don't like how he was kind of a stalker at times in this movie, like, dude, stop being creepy. Other than that aspect, I really like Gwen and Peter together in this movie. They have great chemistry together as actors, and the way the writers wrote their relationship was done really well as well. The writing and their chemistry makes you really care for their relationship. And it was really sad when Gwen ended up dying in Peter's arms at the end of the movie. The way The Amazing Spider-Man 2 handled her death was done so extremely well. The performance of Andrew and the way they set up the aftermath of her death, it was just such a big highlight in this film. A really sad moment, but one of the best parts of the entire movie. Another thing I liked about this movie was Electro. I never really had much of a problem with him, but he was certainly a bit of an underdeveloped character in this, and I like how he was handled much more in No Way Home. Aunt May was amazing, no pun intended, in this movie as well. You know, rewatching this movie, I really appreciated the moments they gave Aunt May, because she has a good amount of screen time in this movie, and I wish they gave her more screen time because the stuff that she was given was really great. Sally Field really is an incredible actress, and she has such a great performance in this movie. The best Aunt May part in this movie, and what made me want to see more from her and Peter's relationship, is the one scene between her and Peter where she is in his bedroom and she finds out that Peter is investigating his father, and the way that whole scene played out with her getting emotional about Peter doing this and her not wanting to see him get hurt and her talking about how she's his boy and stuff. It's like, that was all a really gut-punching, emotional scene. 10 years ago, I didn't really remember that scene, but rewatching it in theaters, that scene just hits really differently now. And Andrew Garfield, Sally Field did a brilliant job acting in this scene. Also, I have to highlight the directing from Mark Webb. The dude is a great director. Just look at some of his other work outside the Amazing Spider-Man movies, mainly 500 Days of Summer. It sucks that Sony messed with his vision a whole lot, because if they let this man cook the way he wanted to, we would probably have the best Spider-Man trilogy of all time. I could be wrong because we don't know the true vision of what Mark Webb wanted to do with Spider-Man, but he had a solid start with the first movie, and that movie wasn't 100% his vision either. Also, shout out to the people that created the Spider-Man suit. Like, it looks incredible. The visuals look great, especially those swinging scenes. Probably the best swinging scenes we've ever gotten in any Spider-Man movie. And the music. The music was pretty incredible in this movie as well. Now with the negatives. And the first big negative that pops into my mind is the whole Spider-Man blood storyline. It's really weird, and it takes away from the aspect that anyone could be Spider-Man, which is something that is super important to what makes Spider-Man so special. Plus, what made it worse was how Spider-Man's blood turned Harry into the Green Goblin. And by the way, speaking of Harry, he was such a crybaby in this movie. Like, for half of the movie, he was whining that he needed Spider-Man's blood so bad so he can save his own life. Like, the dude needed to be bitch slapped and go cry in the freaking corner like the baby he is. I like the performance of Harry, and I like the character for some parts of the movie, even though his morals seem to be really inconsistent. But like, boo freaking who? Go cry by your dead parents' graves about how much you don't want to die. I don't give a damn. No one gives a damn about your bony white ass. Ugh. Sorry, I don't like rich crybabies. And he ended up killing Gwen for no good reason, just because he felt betrayed that Peter didn't want to save his life. Like, who the hell are you? Where did you even come from? Anyway, there's also the overstuffed storylines. Like, it's just way too much crap for one movie to handle. There's so much that happens that I forget some of the storylines every time I watch the movie. And I just rewatched it too. Also, the Rhino is just flat out embarrassing. So with that all being mushed together, the final result for me is just an okay film that could have been so much better. And I do wonder what the true vision of Mark Webb's sequel really was. And I wonder how his trilogy as a whole would have looked without any studio interfering whatsoever, because there was some studio interference in the first movie as well. Like, there's some great ideas in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I wonder how much is Mark Webb's ideas and the studio's ideas. Like, some of the great ideas is just, like, for example, more of a focus on Peter's parents. I do like the idea of mentioning and focusing a bit on who Peter's parents were, and also makes the Amazing Spider-Man movies different from the Raimi movies by doing so. But what they do with his parents is stuff that I don't think works, like with someone framing them and dying on the plane with some sort of conspiracy with Norman Osborn, and he for some reason framed Peter's parents. It's just way too convoluted and way too much for Spider-Man. I do know in the comics Peter Parker's parents were SHIELD agents at one point, and they were many different things throughout different storylines and stuff. But honestly, I think Peter's parents should just be normal people and nothing to do with conspiracy theories or FBI bullcrap. And I feel like there should have been another reason for why Peter's parents left him. I feel like there could be some really good drama there. Maybe it's like a family drama reason for why Peter's parents left him, and that could have been explored in the sequel. But no, they decided to do some big conspiracy thing. I think Harry being introduced in this movie works, plus the actor that plays Harry did a great job with what he was given. But I think he shouldn't have been the Goblin in this movie. And maybe in one of the sequels, Harry could have eventually become the Green Goblin. If they were going to make Harry the Green Goblin in this movie, they should have came up with another reason for why he did, other than having daddy issues and him reinforcing the fact that he wants to live so badly over and over and over again to the point where he'll destroy everything in his way just so he can live. And I don't want to say why does he want to live so badly. Like, everyone obviously wants to be alive and stuff, but it's so over the top. The whole reason why he becomes the Green Goblin and wants to kill Spider-Man is just because he won't give him his blood. Like, that's lame. All of the setup for future movies needed to be cut out. It makes this movie worse that there's so much setup in this for things that we will just never see. And half of the things they set up were things that no one even cared about, like the Sinister Six movie. They set that up. And to this day, they are still trying to make that Sinister Six movie. I don't know if it's in the Amazing Spider-Man universe anymore, or if it's going to be in the MCU or its own universe like Madam Web. Like, no one wants or cares about your Sinister Six movie. I don't get Sony's obsession with that team. Like, let that shit go. So, I'm glad 10 years later this movie is now seen as not so bad of a movie, and I'm glad Andrew Garfield is getting the praise that he's always deserved. But The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is just an okay movie with setup that will never get a proper resolution.